Tonight on True Crime Talk. Do you think you know today's serial killers? Have you ever wondered why they do the things they do? Phil Chalmers, the man who talks to killers, brings us the latest research on today's American serial killers. This man has spent over 40 years studying the minds of dangerous killers. Since 1985, he has interviewed more than 1,000 convicted murderers, including some of the most notorious serial killers in U.S. history, such as Charles Manson, the son of Sam, David Berkowitz, and Dennis Rader, the BTK killer. His expertise has made him a trusted resource for law enforcement and the FBI, with his live profiling sessions gaining legendary status. American profiler Phil Chalmers destroys the myths of today's serial killers and offers a new look, updating the research done by the early FBI profilers in the 1970s. Most of what people believe about serial killers today are myths and are no longer true. Welcome to True Crime Talk with Nick Edwards. This is a first time for us here at True Crime Talk. We have an actual profiler joining us here today. We have the great Phil Chalmers. He's here to talk to us about serial killers. He is a serial killer expert. He has a new book coming out called Speaking Truth to Evil. In fact, it's already out. The myths and facts surrounding today's serial killers. So we, Carolyn, are going to get a bit of an education here today, and we hope that the listeners do as well. So Phil, I would imagine some of the folks tuning in today will already know of you and know of your background, but for those that don't, bring us up to speed.
Well, thanks for having me on. I was raised in Northeast Ohio, Cleveland, inner city Cleveland, and had a dysfunctional upbringing, dysfunctional family, and kind of led me into working with troubled kids in Cleveland. And kind of one thing led to another, and I ended up speaking to teenagers, interviewing teen killers and school shooters, writing a bunch of books on that, training law enforcement, training the FBI. And then I switched gears to serial murder, and I've been really interviewing a ton of serial killers over the last 10, 15, 20 years, and just released my first big serial killer book this last week. So I've done a lot of stuff, worked with a lot of offenders, 40 years active, over 1,000 killers, and it's been quite the ride. But I got 7 more months of traveling and touring and training, and I'm going to finally open up a museum so I can spend every night in my own bed. I can't wait.
On the cover of your new book, Speaking Truth to Evil, you are standing in a prison cell, and then on your author page, you appear to be in looks like a different prison cell. I imagine this is just before they let you out on work release. What prison were you in? Is that one that we would know of?
So typically the author's picture is not on the cover. For some reason, Wild Blue Press put me on the cover, which is just, that's not my doing.
It's because you're so good looking.
No, I'm not. That's probably going to hurt my book sales. But I take a lot of my press photos at my favorite prison in Ohio. It's in Medina. It's the Ohio State Penitentiary. It's the site of the movie Shawshank Redemption. So I love that prison, and it's a great setting. And I shoot a lot of video and photos and stuff there. So I'm standing in a cell that somebody did live in at one time at the Ohio State Penitentiary, and that's where those photos are taken.
I can describe that penitentiary in one word: dank. Right? It is dank in there. It's like they built it when it was cold outside and the building never warmed up. It's just like it's wet and cold. I toured it in the summertime, and it was like 20 degrees cooler inside the prison than it was outside. It's just the most, you say your favorite, but it's the most uncomfortable place, one of the most uncomfortable places I've ever stepped foot in.
I can't imagine living there. I've met a lot of inmates.
I couldn't imagine the people that had to live there.
Yeah. I met a lot of people who have lived there, and it's kind of neat because I get to talk to them about what was it like. I really love that prison because Shawshank Redemption is one of my favorite movies. And it's just a great setting. It's a prison that's not been redone. It's the original cells, the original bunk beds, the original toilets. It's kind of hard to find in the United States.
I'm looking at your author page on Amazon, and you are standing next to a very tall inmate.
Yeah.
Who is that?
It's a serial killer from New York. His name is Robert Spahalski. I found him interesting because his twin brother is also a killer. So he's a serial killer, killed multiple women, and his twin brother also killed someone. So it's a very interesting serial killer. I've never interviewed a serial killer who had a twin brother that was also an offender.
What was his MO?
Drugs, and he was a lust killer. So he would have sex with the women and then kill them. He had an urge that he couldn't fight. He said it was almost like a demon. And every time he had the urge to kill someone, he smelled oranges. That was the most bizarre interview. He smelled oranges, and he knew he was about to kill the woman he was with. Kind of weird.
How many victims?
I think it was 5 to 7 for him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 5 to 7, something like that.
And he admitted all of this, or most of it, to you and to the courts?
I think he did admit to the crimes. I think they kind of had him, though.
Mm-hmm.
So
what does that tell you about nature versus nurture then? His twin brother is also a killer?
Yeah, I still think that serial killers are made. They're not born. But yeah, it's a rare one that his twin brother was also a killer. Yeah, I think serial killers are made, though.
I think far more common is you will find where it's kind of handed down, where there's a father that killed and then a son goes on to kill. I've seen that. While it's not overly common, I've come across that several times.
Yeah, there have been some of those cases. Yep.
And a lot of times it's because, I hate to use the term natural progression, but usually when a young man has a missing father, absent father, or a shitty childhood, they grow up to be very angry and sometimes evil individuals.
Yeah, the fatherless component is a big part of my research, and the dysfunction of the mom and dad, the lack of bonding, the lack of love. There's a lot of issues with mom, dad, and the serial killer growing up. So we see a lot of that. Head trauma plays a role. There are some other things, but it's the mom and dad don't love you is a bad thing.
What is your MO? Do you write a letter to the serial killer? How do you get in contact with these different individuals that you've interviewed over the years?
Yeah, so anybody can write a letter to any killer, any inmate in the United States. So whoever it is, you want to write a letter to Brad Colehap, or the Idaho 4 killer, you can write a letter to him. And I concoct a letter that I've been doing for 40 years, and it works. I usually get a response. About 70% chance I get a response. Once I get a response from them, I kind of gauge how they responded to me. If I'm interested in them, I'll move to texting or email or phone calls, and I may go and visit them face to face if I really want to meet them. So that's kind of the process of how it goes.
How do you choose? How do you initially decide who you want to reach out to?
I pretty much send a letter to every serial killer I come across. Just to kind of get a gauge on every person I can. You'll see a very long list of serial killers that I've interviewed in my museum. There's over 200. Big ones: Manson, BTK, Son of Sam, Hillside Strangler, Gainesville Ripper. The big ones down to like people that nobody's ever heard of. But I try to kind of engage with as many of them as I can.
And then based on that, you might set up in-person meetings with them?
Yeah, if I find them intriguing and I think we could do some work together, or they're going to confess to an unsolved murder, or they're going to tell me where a body is, those kind of cases, I'll meet with them in person. Yeah, depends on the situation. They want to do work, they want to do a project with me, I'll go meet with them in person. Other than that, most of the stuff can be done over the phone or through email or texting. They have tablets and they can communicate with me just like anybody else.
Have you ever interviewed William Sapp in Ohio?
I know who he is.
Hmm.
For some reason, he doesn't want to talk to me. He's got other people he talks to, and I think he thinks I'm police, so he doesn't talk to me.
Yeah, and he's one of the ones where he claims to have a bunch of more victims and that they're still out there. Some of them haven't been recovered yet.
Yeah.
And I just don't know how much weight to put into anything that.
Yeah, and he's on death row, and he could be, Ohio could kill him. So he's I imagine he's very nervous about saying a whole lot to put himself in the spotlight, because there's a lot of people on death row in Ohio, and he might move up to the front of the line if he does.
Well, they did that dumb thing where we only buy the drugs that we administer to them from one location, and then they figured out we were using them to execute persons on death row, and then they stopped selling them to the state of Ohio. So now they have to either come up with a different method, or there are people that want to abolish the death penalty.
Interesting.
You could talk me into it either way. My issue with the death penalty is not that we have it. It's just, I think I don't know how genuine I am about my belief that we should have it, because if I were the one with my hand on the switch, I don't know that I'd be able to pull it. This individual, William Sapp, I mean, if there was ever anybody that deserved it, he certainly does. And I try to remind people that are overly loud about abolishing the death penalty that hey, why don't spend a half an hour and read about some of these guys that we are going to put to death, because some of them are the absolute worst of the worst. And you've met with some of these people face to face and traded letters with them. Let me tell you about my own experience here. This will show you how naive I was. But the only serial killer that I've ever wrote a letter to was Edmund Kemper.
Okay.
And he was, I don't know if you've ever exchanged any correspondence with him.
He doesn't really write back.
Right. And which, everything that I read in Mindhunter, it was saying you can't shut him up. He loves talking to everybody, which was more kind of BTK. He actually does really like talking to everybody. Look, I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed, and maybe Ed Kemper is. So maybe it was a bad idea for me to write him a letter and try to rope him into a back and forth. What I got in return for my nice letter that I sent to him was he handed off my information to another inmate who then annoyed me for a couple of months. So that was a fun little game that Ed got to play with me.
Right. Yeah, he won't respond, and the Green River Killer won't respond, and many of those guys you'll never hear from them. And Kemper just doesn't write people back. I mean, I've offered money to get him to respond; he just won't respond. So, yeah.
Why do you think? And this may be a pure guess on your part, but why do you think that is? Why do you? And I know everybody has different personalities, but you've really put these guys under the microscope. Why do you think someone like a BTK, who seems overly eager to talk with people, and then somebody like a Kemper or Gary Ridgway has no interest?
Because it's the number one thing I say when people say, what do all these serial killers have in common? And the answer is nothing. Mm-hmm. And you'll see that in my new book. We can't lump them all into Gacy and Dahmer and Bundy anymore. They're all different. Everybody has different motivations. They kill differently. They have different reasons. And so, there are serial killers that like to brag about their murders. Not many, by the way. That's a myth. I should have made that one of my myths. Serial killers like to brag. I wish they like to brag. I could do a lot of interviews then. The truth is, they don't even like to talk about their crimes. So when you see BTK bragging at court, that's rare, man. That doesn't happen very often. And he'll never tell you that through the mail. He did it in court. Son of Sam will never talk about his crimes. I mean, a lot of guys are like him. So they're all different, Nick. And once we get that figured out, we can take them one at a time. Also, people ask me, what's the craziest thing about serial killers? The fact is that they're normal. I can't think of anything else to tell you but that they are normal, man. They look normal. They act normal. You would never know in a million years these are serial killers. If I had you come in and meet 10 people and 3 of them were serial killers, you would not be able to pick those people out.
Carolyn, tell him about our serial killer that we stumbled upon from Northeast Ohio, Boardman, Ohio. Recently, this guy's been deceased for quite some time, and people were trying to go back in time and figure out where he was, what he was up to, because we now know him to be a serial killer. Tell Phil a little bit about our guy from Boardman.
In Boardman, right outside of Youngstown, there were 2 murders of young. There's actually 3, but 2 were solved. 12 and 13-year-old boys, both walking home and pulled off the street, and found somewhere else within days. And they went unsolved for 50 years. Wow. And then Joseph Norman Hill, who was a family guy living in the center of Boardman, which especially back in the 70s was a pretty quiet place. They just identified him within the last couple years, and he passed away, I think, in 2018 in California. So he had moved out of Ohio a few years later, late 70s, and lived in California, and they haven't been able to find out a whole lot about him. I think he was born in this area. He went to high school, at least, in this area. I don't know if he even graduated, and then he drove a local truck. And they haven't been able to find a lot of photos of him from back in this time.
Interesting.
Or he didn't have much of a record. I think there was one indecent exposure charge on his record, and that was it. And all this time. So then the question is, these were 2 very similar looking victims, age, size, and there's one other unsolved case in the area. So the question is, could it have been him, and what else could he have done? And where was he for all this
Usually
time?
they don't just stop at 2.
Right.
Especially this type, pulling in small boys off of the street in his car. And Carolyn spoke with some people that grew up on that street. And what did they tell you about Joseph Norman Hill?
They described him as a nice family guy, even gentle. I talked to his next door neighbor, who was a kid at the time, a young kid, at around 5 years old at the time. And he would swim at his house, and Hill's wife would babysit for him, and he let them borrow their van and would bring them leftover produce from his truck routes. And a generous guy. That's how they described him. They said if anyone on the street, he would have probably been their last guess as who could have been capable of committing.
That's exactly what they said about Rader.
Yeah.
Dennis Rader.
It makes you wonder then, how can you identify these people better? Especially, it's scary to think what you're saying, that there's no real pattern to them.
Here, you want to get really scared? There's no real warning signs once they're active, unless they mess up. And the good news is they get overconfident at the end and they mess up. They make mistakes. Unless you catch them, looking in windows or dragging a body, they're very hard to catch while they're active. And the police department has to get lucky. That's really what it takes. So they're tough. I mean, you can kind of identify them when they're children. They're bedwetting, animal cruelty, fire starting, voyeurism. You could see some of those things that Bundy and Rader and all these guys did. But once they're in the thick of it, it's very tough to catch them. And thankfully, they do make a lot of mistakes. And we're able to catch the Dahmers, Bundys, Gacy's, and BTKs because they mess up.
And in this case, it was DNA. They eventually were able to test. There was sexual assault involved in both cases, and they were able to test the DNA and do genealogy to identify him.
That's interesting. And Boardman is the hometown of Bernie Kosar.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
for you sports fans out there.
Have you ever heard of Edward Surratt? That's another
one. Edward Surratt is a serial killer in prison in Florida. He's a shotgun killer, and he's killed quite a few people up and down, Florida, South Carolina.
Also PA, I think, and then there was a couple in the Boardman area.
I think he was a trucker.
I think so. And one of the officers at the Boardman police said out of everyone in their 30-year career that they talked to, he was the most frightening person to sit in front of.
I've been talking to Edward Surratt. I'm trying to get him to confess to his unsolved murders.
Really?
Yeah. He's a black serial killer. If you guys don't know this, my new book has 1,036 black serial killers where I destroy the myths of serial murder. And the number one myth is people think serial killers are white, and only 30% are. So we have a new crime wave in our country right now.
30% in recent years, 30% overall?
In the last 20 years and today, only 31% of serial killers are white, 60% are black.
So is that changing over time, or is that one of the myths that...
No, it's changing over time. Like 40 years ago or 50 years ago was the other way around. Things are rapidly changing in the serial killer profile.
Why do you think that is?
Well, a lot of young black men grow up in unstable homes. A lot of young black men have no fathers. Only 25% there's a father in the home. There's a lot of drugs involved. There's a lot of racism. They're angry about racism. They're angry at the world because of the upbringing they've had. So a lot of them, well, they're a mix of lust killers and anger retaliatory killers. But and it's not getting any better. It's getting worse. And the numbers are continuing. Even mass murderers now are becoming more and more black males. We just had 2 in the last couple of weeks, one at a military base and one at a office building in New York City, the NFL building. We're starting to see more and more of a diversity of mass murderers and serial murder.
And then back to the flip of that from decades ago when it was 70% white.
Yeah.
I always thought a lot of that had to do with major world events, things like Vietnam, right? Like we see a lot of some of the vets would return and become serial killers. There was a lot of drugs involved in that war as well. And then also the offspring of those men coming back from war.
Yeah. I would say, if I remember the numbers correctly, I didn't cover this in my book, but I think 25% of serial killers might be military, have military history. So, a lot more are not, but there has been some for sure.
You had pretty lengthy correspondence with Berkowitz, son of Sam.
I have.
So take us through this a little bit, because there's a lot of chatter out there about conspiracy theories that still to this day remain with the thoughts about Son of Sam. I've always thought Berkowitz is absolutely guilty of everything that he's been charged with, but a lot of chatter still out there.
Absolutely guilty of everything he's charged with. No more victims. He's talked about them all. There was no barking dog. His attorneys made that up. There was no multiple people involved, like the Summer of Sam TV show. He acted alone. And straight up, he told me it was all satanic. It was Satanism. I was controlled by the devil. Gets to prison, does some crazy interviews, acts crazy for a while, and then turns his life over to God, and he changes his name to the Son of Hope. And so now when I talk to him, he's very religious. Obviously he'll never talk about his crimes. And I don't know if you know that he'll never talk about his crimes. But he's been cordial enough with me. We met early on in my career, and we stayed in touch, and he just did an interview with me on my podcast. So he doesn't do that very often. And but the only thing he'll talk about is maybe his childhood and maybe prison and his new life with God. That's kind of all he talks about now.
I've heard he's extremely polite.
Very polite. He's up for parole too. He's been denied parole many times, but he's literally up for parole.
Not that he should be up for parole. He should be denied parole.
He's up for parole. He's up for parole.
I mean, this is just another example. It's like when I hear these people come up with all these creative other ways that other individuals were involved or Berkowitz wasn't involved, and I just want to shake them and go, can you actually look at the facts? Look at the facts, because then you'll quit with this nonsense very quickly.
Oh no,
one thing
that is all bullshit. He's definitely, not only was he
yeah,
involved, he was the only one involved. Yeah,
exactly.
and he'll tell you that.
Most folks don't know that he was a serial arsonist prior to the killings. A lot of people don't know that he would return to the location of the killings to masturbate. The guy was as cruel and evil and weird as they get.
He set over 1,000 fires. His nickname was Pyro.
How much trust can you put, of all the serial killers you've talked to, how much trust can you put into what they're saying? Are they believable?
It takes me a little while to figure them out, right? So I've been doing this a long time. I can figure people out pretty quickly. And some of them, I trust, and some of them, when I don't trust them, we part ways. It's that simple. Once I have a feeling they're lying to me or not being honest with me, I basically call them out like, hey, listen, if you're going to work with me, this is how it goes. And if they won't, I cut them loose. And I've done that several times. Yeah. But there are guys I work with, Carolyn, who been offered money to confess to unsolved murders. And they basically said, even though they need money, they'll say, I didn't do that. They will not confess to something they haven't done. And it's a good test to see in how reliable are these guys. Or if you work with them as long as I have been, Lake Berkowitz, it's been 20, 30 years. You kind of get to know them. This guy's character this is what it is, That's kind of the way I look at it.
So there's a bit of an art to it. I've always wondered that about people who study serial killers and do these interviews. How much can you glean from it if they can be, lying to you? I thought, my understanding is they're kind of notorious liars. So there's a bit of an art to it to get to know them. And
yeah, there has been, like John Wayne Gacy. I don't believe a word that guy says. There has been guys like that. But then there's been a lot of guys that have been straight up honest about everything, like BTK confessed to all the murders he did right at the beginning. But there are guys that'll hold back cases like William Sapp and go to prison to use that to control people. So I'm going to go back to the very beginning statements, is they're all different. You can't take them all, you got to take them one at a time.
I know they were looking into a case in Oklahoma in regard to Dennis Rader, BTK, but do you think he's actually told us all of the victims?
Yes, I believe
so as well.
Rader is such a narcissistic asshole that he definitely confessed to everything that he did. And they've been trying to loop him into this unsolved case or this new, and he's basically said, hey, this, I didn't do that.
Right. He is one. I mean, these guys, all of them, of course, aggravate me. They're all disgusting, but he is one that annoys me to no end. He thinks he's so GD special, right? He just thinks so highly of himself. It's crazy.
I don't talk to him anymore for that reason, Nick. He's an asshole, and he he's gonna, you have to fill an application to talk to him. He's getting crazy like that. And then he's like, I'm retired from being a serial killer now. So, I mean, yeah, he thinks a lot of himself. Yeah. But in my museum that we open in April, we're going to have a whole bunch of Rader stuff in it. We've gotten a whole, it's going to blow people's mind what I have in my museum, but we have his art set. We have all kind of stuff, his journals, his logs, his religious stuff. We got our hands on some interesting stuff.
And then he teases, he picks on the police still to this day, where he had, I think it was, I can't think, I'm blanking on her name at the moment, but in one of her BTK books, he kept pointing out things.
Catherine Ramsland. Yeah.
Yeah. He kept pointing out things to her and how could the police not pick up on my favorite number was 3? And he would give all these examples of the number 3 being involved in his different crimes and all kinds of just crazy stuff. It's like nobody could pick up on any of this stuff because it didn't mean anything to anybody other than you. And
right.
Yeah, he's I've spoke to somebody that works where he's housed, and they say he's looking very old and not in very good
Oh, I
shape.
say in the next 6 months, we're going to lose BTK, we're going to lose the Green River Killer, and we're going to lose Kemper. They're all very ill, all three of those guys.
Yeah, Kemper's pretty old and Rader's pretty old. I can't remember how old Gary Ridgway is, but he's
Ridgway's, they're all sick. Too. Yeah, they're all sick. Kemper and Ridgway are like in the hospital, and Rader is just slowly dying in his cell.
So, what is part of your book, Speaking Truth to Evil, is the myths and facts surrounding today's serial killer. So we've touched on a myth or two already, but maybe tell us one of the ones that you like the most, or maybe the one that you are quick to point out to folks that are just learning about these types of predators.
I mean, the big one is who they are. Most serial killers are black males. That's a shocker to most people. Another big one is people think the myth is serial killers because they're mostly men, they kill women. The victimology is 50-50. So I tell men you could easily be a victim of a serial killer. There's an old myth that serial killers only kill up close and personal, like strangulation, stabbing, bludgeoning. The number one way serial killers kill today is gunfire, shooting, which throws off the police because they think it's drugs and gangs. Those are the big three. Who they are, how they kill, who they kill are really important. And because even law enforcement doesn't know the answers to those things, these guys are getting away with murder a longer period of time. So I would say those are the ones that, that I think are the big three of my book.
And have you had any lead you to an unknown victim or a body?
Well, yeah, we are always working on that. I just got from a serial killer in Detroit. He just sent me 25 unsolved murders confession. So we're getting ready to work with that with the Detroit police. I have another serial killer in Georgia just gave me 2 confessions to 2 unsolved murders in Georgia. Long haul trucker Delmas Colvin has told me about several unsolved murders. We've been looking for bodies in several locations. We're working it. Now, sometimes law enforcement won't cooperate with us. So I'll get a confession and law enforcement's not interested, right? So that kind of kills that. But for those that are, we are working with law enforcement on some of these cases.
Are you able to say who the serial killer from Detroit is that you've been talking
about? You can look him up. Dion Wade.
Okay. Yeah,
Dion Wade.
We in our short history here at True Crime Talk, we've featured 2, I believe, right, Carolyn? 2 serial killers from the
that's right.
Detroit area. Yeah.
Have you
talked about Dion Wade a little bit?
Yeah.
If you look up Dion Wade,
story.
Yeah,
kind of a side story of
I can't believe you know who Dion Wade is. Nobody does, but Dion Wade's in prison for a few murders, and he's basically saying, "Hey, man, I killed more than John Wayne Gacy, which is 33." So, yeah.
Was he killing sex workers?
He when he was 12 years old, he stabbed his mother's drug dealer to death, and he got addicted to the blood and the lust of it. And then he really wanted to kill people. Some of it he did because he was in a gang, but it didn't matter. He was killing people because he enjoyed it. Some were shot, some were stabbed. Some were men, some were women. It's a very interesting story, but we're going to break this whole thing. It'll be in my museum. We're going to try to see if we can solve some of these unsolved murders for Detroit.
Is that, with all your research, I'm assuming that's one of your main goals, is to help find unsolved connections with unsolved cases. And then is it also changing how profiling is done, since you're uncovering these myths and the statistics are changing? And do you think that profiling methods have to be brought up to modern times?
Well, those are good questions. So my ultimate goal is to find bodies and solve cold cases. Anytime I do an interview, one of the first things I ask them is, can you tell me something you've never told anybody before? Can you tell me where a body is that you've never given up? Can you tell me about an unsolved murder? Those are always the things I ask. So that is my goal. That's why I do this, for the victims and their families. But, there was these books written in 1970, John Douglas, Robert Ressler, Roy Hazelwood, the early FBI profilers, and the Mindhunter show on Netflix. They did some amazing research. They only interviewed like 36 killers, but they did this amazing research, and it came out in 1970. It amazes me that people are still quoting their research in 2025, 55 years later, like this stuff still applies today. Like I hear experts and criminologists on TV shows every day, like the serial killers mostly white, they kill women, and it was like, I need to get this out there. So that's why I started doing this book and talking to as many killers as I could, just to find out, like, I don't think these things are still true, and they weren't. So I'm updating the research from the Mindhunters and the early FBI profilers. No, nothing against them, but there's no way the research you've done in 1970 applies in 2025. There's no way. So I'm updating that research, and if you guys get the book, you're going to see how much has changed since then.
I'll be getting the book because I need to get updated myself. I'm one of the people that you just described. I mean, I have read every FBI book that came out from those original Mindhunters, and you're right. The landscape has changed. It doesn't all apply or work still today. Where it still works.
But Nick, those guys were amazing.
Yeah,
the work they did back then was groundbreaking. So don't ever think I'm disrespecting their work, but I'm just saying you just can't apply the research. 55 years later, it just doesn't work.
Yeah, and look, I've hung out with John Douglas. I've interviewed him several times. I was lucky enough to interview probably my favorite interview conversation of anybody in law enforcement or in that world ever is Ann Burgess. I didn't get the opportunity to speak with Roy Hazelwood or Ressler. I would have enjoyed that, but you're the fourth profiler that I've spoke to, but where it still works for me and in what I do, what I'm typically working on for True Crime Garage and then for work for here in the state of Ohio is I'm always working on cold cases, and a lot of these are old ones. I usually don't touch anything that's more recent than the 90s. So a lot of that, what I've learned from the old guard still applies to what I'm doing most of the time. And it's amazing the stuff that they came up with. And it's, and it truly took a team of very bright and, let's say, creative individuals to come up with a lot of their findings and really to start what they did, because they were seeing a trend that motive was becoming more elusive and the rise of stranger on stranger crimes. And if you fail to shift, right, if you're not getting better, you're getting worse. And so I will definitely be picking up your book to further my education on the subject matter.
And I want to say this, Nick. I'm a different type of profiler than the early, like where the guys look at the evidence and they try to profile the victim. I'm on the other side of the coin of profiling, where I'm teaching law enforcement, school administrators, teachers, how to spot a killer. Right. So I'm teaching them how to profile their students, how to profile the public. And my goal of profiling is more of training. Like, we've stopped a lot of school shootings and suicides and stuff. I was an expert for many, many years of juvenile killers. And my goal is to teach, people, how do you spot a teen killer? How do you spot a school shooter? How do you spot a serial killer? And that's kind of what I've been doing in training people.
Can you give us just a couple points with the school shooters?
Yeah. So if you go to philchalmers.com, there's a whole notebook you can download for free. Basically, these kids don't have a dad. They come from a dysfunctional, abusive home. They're usually messing with narcotics, drugs, alcohol of some kind. They're suicidal themselves. they're a big fan and mesmerized with violence. They're mesmerized with guns or deadly weapons. And there's 13 causes in my notes and in my early books. And you kind of, I think it takes like 3 to 6 of those causes stacked on top of each other to create a juvenile killer or a school shooter. And a lot of kids have those. I think there's like 25 of those kids in every school. So that's a big part of my training as well.
And if you looked at why, when I was in school, it was unheard of. That wasn't even a thing. And now that my kids are in school, they are doing drills for school shooters. And even in first grade, I remember they're older now, but my son's job was to open the window. Why this uprising and school shootings at all?
We're basically raising and creating killers. We are raising a generation of killers in America. By the stuff they look at, watch, and play, by the lifestyles that they live, by the families that they grow up in. Our society encourages mothers to ditch their spouses. There's a lot. It's deep and it's heavy, and it's, I don't want to be political. I try to destroy politics, but there's a lot of things happening in this country that are not helping our situation. And basically, these kids grow up surrounded by violence from a very young age. 5-year-olds are playing Grand Theft Auto and this kind of thing. So these are children whose brains aren't fully developed. They're being manipulated and modeled to doing this stuff, and their family structure is broken. There's just so many things we could talk about. A lot of them are medications that cause them to be depressed or violent. And so it's the world these kids grow up in. And I've gone after everybody in my new book about that whole chapter. We need to stop all this craziness. And these kids, they used to grow up in a very protective environment. And now at 5 years old, they're looking at internet porn and shooting prostitutes and killing cops. And, there's nothing left for children anymore, starting as early as 5. Their innocence. What I'm saying is that they lost their innocence at an early age.
He is Phil Chalmers. The book is Speaking Truth to Evil. It's available paperback, hardback, ebook, audiobook. I'm looking forward to digging in myself. Hey, thanks, Phil, for joining us and teaching us a little bit here today.
Nick and Carolyn, thank you so much.
If you love true crime, there's a whole bunch of it just waiting for you at wildbluepress.com. Some of the very best in true crime is available from the good folks over at Wild Blue Press. Books like Monster by Steve Jackson, The Delphi Murders by Nick Edwards, The Garden State Parkway Murders by Christian Barth, and of course, Speaking Truth to Evil, The Myths and Facts Surrounding Today's Serial Killers by American profiler Phil Chalmers. That's wildbluepress.com for everything interesting in the world of true crime. Books, ebooks, and audio. Make sure that you like, subscribe, and follow True Crime Talk on your listening app, and support True Crime Talk by leaving a positive review so we can keep bringing to you more great true crime talk. Thanks for listening.